10 African nations have just drawn a line in the sand. For decades, their lands have been stripped bare. Gold mined, coffee harvested, trees felled, and minerals dug deep, all for the benefit of factories and boardrooms far beyond their borders. The wealth of a continent flowed outward, while its people were told to wait, to hope, to survive. But now that tide is turning. Across Ghana, Niger, Uganda, and beyond, a quiet revolution is unfolding. Governments are standing firm. No more cheap raw exports. No more watching foreign corporations build fortunes off African sweat and soil. Factories are being built, rules are being rewritten, and for once, the value is staying home. This is not just about trade. It's about sovereignty. It's about justice, and it's long overdue. So the question now is, if Africa no longer plays the part of the silent supplier, what role does the West play? Stay with us. This isn't just another headline. It's the rebirth our ancestors dreamt of. Subscribe and stay woke. For a future where Africa Rising is more than a slogan, it's a movement. Across the African continent, a silent shift has become a seismic tremor. One by one, countries are slamming the brakes on a centuries-old pattern, exporting raw materials for pennies, while foreign powers profit handsomely. Now, 10 African nations have declared a bold new doctrine: keep the value at home. It began quietly, but the message is now thunderous. In 2021, Uganda turned heads by banning the export of raw coffee beans. For decades, Ugandan farmers harvested the finest Arabica, only to see foreign companies process, package, and profit abroad. Today, Uganda exports roasted, bagged coffee, ready for shelves, not sacks. It's about dignity and economic justice. Ghana, one of Africa's leading gold producers, has rewritten its rules entirely. Now, 20% of all refined gold must be sold directly to its central bank, the Bank of Ghana. Moreover, foreign mining firms are required to refine part of their gold inside the country. No more sending raw bullion overseas, while Ghana scrambles for foreign currency during crises. This move speaks of sovereignty reclaimed. If our gold is good enough to power your banks, it's good enough to back our own, one Ghanaian official said. And that sentiment echoes across the region. In West Africa, Guinea, shaken by spiraling food prices, chose people over profit. It banned the export of staple crops like rice, maize, and yams. For too long, Guinea's fertile farms fed distant markets while its citizens faced empty shelves. Now the country says, our food is for our people first. Gabon, back in 2010, was among the first to pull the plug on raw timber exports. It banned the sale of unprocessed logs, sparking the birth of domestic industries in furniture, carpentry, and manufacturing. The result? Local jobs soared, the economy diversified, and the nation no longer played the part of a cheap warehouse for European carpenters. Mozambique followed suit in 2017, cutting off raw wood exports and investing in its own processing plants. Western companies used to buying cheap logs were forced to rethink their strategies or pay higher prices for finished products made in Africa. Namibia, sensing the lithium boom that's fueling the electric vehicle revolution, didn't wait to be left behind. Instead of handing over its lithium raw, it paused exports altogether. If foreign car makers want access, they must build value at home. Factories, jobs, skills on Namibian soil. Then came Ivory Coast, the world's cocoa giant. For decades, it supplied raw cocoa beans, while Western chocolate giants reaped billions. Now that chain is breaking. Raw exports are restricted. Chocolate production is shifting local. No longer will the world's richest cocoa fields yield only crumbs for their caretakers. The Democratic Republic of the Congo, the beating heart of the global tech revolution, is rich in cobalt and copper. Smartphones, solar panels, electric vehicles, all depend on these minerals. For years, they left Congolese soil in raw form, headed for refinement in far-off lands. Now the DRC demands in-country processing. It's not just supplying the future, it's building it too. Niger, long a linchpin in France's nuclear power supply, slapped restrictions on uranium exports. Paris, where nearly 70% of electricity depends on that uranium, was caught off guard. Why the shock? Because Niger, one of the world's poorest nations, was done selling its riches for cents while its people lived in poverty. It's not just about uranium, it's about dignity. And then there's Zimbabwe, home to massive chrome reserves. For decades, raw chrome left the country only to return as high-value steel and chemicals. Zimbabwe banned raw exports, investing instead in local smelting. Now the profits stay home, and the world must pay a fairer price. These aren't isolated policy tweaks. They are coordinated declarations of independence. Each move chips away at the exploitative scaffolding that kept Africa on the margins of global wealth. For centuries, the continent was rich in resources, but poor in power. These 10 nations are flipping that equation. More than 80% of Africa's resource exports have historically been raw materials. In most cases, less than 20% of the total value returns to the country of origin. That imbalance is no accident. It was designed to keep Africa dependent, silent, and waiting. But the silence is over. Factories are rising, new policies are taking shape, old agreements are being torn up. And at the center of it all lies one truth. Africa no longer accepts that value must always flow outward. But behind every policy lies a deeper strategy. What happens when Africa starts setting the rules? The tremor became an earthquake the moment Niger stepped forward. A country long overlooked, often dismissed as a footnote in global energy discourse, Niger shocked the West with one swift policy shift. Uranium exports, once flowing freely to France, would now be restricted, tightened, reevaluated, controlled. This wasn't just bureaucracy. It was a bullet through the heart of European energy security. France, a nation that boasts of its energy independence, was caught flat-footed. Nearly 70% of its electricity comes from nuclear power. And the uranium? It came straight from Nigerian soil. Dirt cheap, quietly extracted, rarely questioned. So when the new leadership in Niger put Paris in the crosshairs, demanding fair terms and local benefits, the silence in French boardrooms was deafening. One headline read, "France's energy lifeline in jeopardy." The fallout was instant. French officials scrambled to secure alternate supply routes. The media swirled with uncertainty. Investors panicked. And yet, across Niger, the people celebrated. For once, they weren't just watching decisions from afar, they were making them. And Niger wasn't alone. In the Democratic Republic of the Congo, global tech companies, those who rely on cobalt and copper for their devices, were facing a similar reckoning. The DRC demanded that these critical minerals be refined at home, not shipped out raw. The West, long accustomed to cheap Congolese exports, faced a painful dilemma. Invest in local infrastructure or pay premium prices elsewhere. Tech giants weren't ready. Their supply chains, once sleek and seamless, were now cracked and uncertain. The emotional peak arrived when Ghana, a country so often praised for its stability, decided it was done playing safe. No more letting foreign companies export raw gold while its own economy remained at the mercy of outside currencies. The new rule, at least 20% of refined gold must go to the Bank of Ghana, and part of the refining must happen in Ghana itself. The gold rush, once external, was finally coming home. Across Accra, local news anchors called it a golden moment. Elderly citizens, once skeptical of government ambition, began to believe. The younger generation saw new job postings in metallurgy and finance. Foreign mining firms, meanwhile, scrambled to meet the new requirements, or risk losing access altogether. Each country's decision became fuel for the next. Uganda's coffee revolution sent shockwaves through the global beverage industry. For years, Western conglomerates profited massively by buying beans raw and roasting them abroad. Now, with Uganda insisting on selling roasted packaged coffee, profit margins shrunk overnight. Coffee chains in Europe and North America began sourcing elsewhere. But the message was clear. Africa will no longer carry the weight while others feast. Guinea, fed up with empty markets and hungry mouths, banned the export of staple foods. No more rice going abroad while its people scraped by. Western importers, who relied on those shipments, were caught off guard. One CEO even confessed, "We never imagined Africa would shut the door." Across social media, voices of the African diaspora erupted in solidarity. In cities like Atlanta, Chicago, and Detroit, Black communities tuned in. Elders nodded, recognizing the echoes of past struggles. Young activists amplified the message. Africa is rising on its terms. In newspapers from London to New York, analysts asked the same question. Why is the West panicking if Africa is so dispensable? Because deep down, the truth was undeniable. The West was always more dependent than it ever wanted to admit. The emotional climax wasn't a single moment, but a wave, a swelling, growing roar of voices across the continent. From Ibrahim Traore in Burkina Faso to local ministers in Zimbabwe, leaders were now unafraid to speak in unapologetic terms. This is our land, our wealth, and our future. International forums once dominated by Western rhetoric began to shift. African delegates walked taller, spoke louder, no longer asking, now demanding. One Ghanaian economist put it plainly, Africa has long been invited to the table only to serve. Today we're pulling up chairs with our own recipes, our own rules, and our own menus. And the West? Caught in the headlights. Choices that once cost them nothing, cheap cocoa, cheap chrome, cheap energy, now came with terms, taxes, and tables turned. And if some leaders fear this wave, others are riding it with bold defiance. Who's steering this new Africa? The ripple effects of Africa's bold stand are no longer confined to headlines or trade reports. They're showing up in the lives of everyday people. Across the continent, the first wave of impact is economic and visible. In Gabon, where raw timber once vanished overseas, the streets of Libreville now echo with the hum of saws and hammers. Local carpentry shops are booming. Furniture factories, once non-existent, now employ thousands. Skilled jobs are returning, and for the first time in a generation, young people are seeing a future that doesn't involve migration or mining under foreign flags. Uganda, once just a name on a coffee bag, now wears its label with pride. New coffee processing plants have sprung up across the country. Roasters, packagers, distributors, roles once reserved for foreign companies are now local careers. Farmers who once sold beans for pennies are now negotiating directly with international buyers, demanding fair trade and often getting it. The results? Household incomes are rising, communities are stabilizing, and confidence is growing. But it's not just about economics. These changes are stitching something far deeper into the fabric of African societies, a sense of control. For too long, economic strategy was dictated from abroad. Now policies are being drafted with local priorities at heart, feeding people before feeding markets, powering homes before powering foreign factories. In Guinea, the impact of the food export ban was felt almost immediately. Grain prices dropped. Markets calmed. For years, villagers watched their harvest packed into crates destined for foreign ports, while they themselves went hungry. Now, with local supplies protected, food security is no longer a distant dream, it's policy. That same principle echoes in Namibia, where the lithium pause sent a clear message. The green revolution must include African equity. If global corporations want Africa's minerals, they'll need to invest in Africa's people. Already negotiations are underway to build processing plants on Namibian soil, factories that could become the backbone of local economies. In Zimbabwe, the chrome ban has catalyzed a new era of smelting and industrial development. Local entrepreneurs are rising to the challenge, backed by government investment. For a nation long battered by sanctions and financial instability, this move offers a path forward. Homegrown, sustainable, and sovereign. Politically, these shifts are altering the balance of power. Governments that once feared backlash for challenging foreign interests are now being rewarded with public support. In the streets of Accra, Kampala, and Niamey, citizens are praising leaders who put national interest first. Where once there was skepticism, there is now expectation. You said we'd keep the value, so where are the jobs? Where are the factories? That demand creates pressure, but also progress. Politicians can no longer win on promises alone. They must deliver. And in the halls of power, something else is changing. African unity is strengthening. Leaders are watching one another, learning, copying, adapting. One nation's bold move becomes another's model. The dominoes are falling in Africa's favor. Of course, not all effects are smooth. Some transitions have been rocky. Exporters have protested. Foreign investors have threatened to pull out. Logistics have stumbled. But through it all, the resolve holds firm. Because for many, the pain of transition is far less than the pain of continued exploitation. And here's the truth. These moves aren't just economic. They're generational. Young Africans born in the wake of colonization, raised in global dependency, are now coming of age in a time of redefinition. They're witnessing a continent refusing to be defined by lack. They see pride where there was once pity, power where there was once pleading. This isn't just a policy shift, it's a cultural one. One teacher in Zimbabwe said it best. We used to teach our children about minerals we don't benefit from. Now we teach them about industries we're building. This emotional shift, this rebirth of dignity, is perhaps the most profound impact of all. Kau hoi moa bin luan. Do you believe this is the path Africa should have taken all along? Say amen in the comments if your heart says yes. But this is not just a local ripple, it's a global wave. What does the world think of this African assertion? As African nations begin to flip the global trade script, the world has been forced into a state of uneasy recalibration. From Brussels to Beijing, governments are watching with wary eyes. Some view Africa's new policies as a long overdue correction. Others see them as a direct threat to their economic interests. The European Union, heavily dependent on Africa's raw exports, timber from Gabon, uranium from Niger, cocoa from Ivory Coast, has responded with mixed signals. While some leaders applaud Africa's industrial aspirations, others warn of supply chain disruptions and trade instability. The real fear, unspoken but obvious, is this. Europe is losing its easy access to cheap wealth. In France, the situation is more urgent and more personal. With Niger closing uranium flows, France's nuclear dominance faces a precarious future. The French government has quietly opened negotiations while accelerating efforts to diversify sources. But beneath the diplomacy lies frustration. Paris is no longer dealing with pliable partners. It's facing governments that talk back, stand firm, and call for fairness. Russia and China, in contrast, have largely embraced the new African posture, at least rhetorically. They offer investment promises and partnership language that paints them as allies rather than colonizers. Yet African leaders are cautious. They've seen this dance before, and then there's the United States. For years, Washington viewed Africa through two lenses, aid and extraction. Now that vision is outdated. As nations like Ghana and the DRC assert more control over their resources, America finds itself at a crossroads. It can either continue trying to secure strategic minerals through old methods, quiet deals, low-cost extraction, soft diplomacy, or it can meet Africa on new terms, as a partner, not a patron. Some signals are promising. Recent U.S. trade delegations have hinted at joint ventures and local investment. But whether those words translate into mutual prosperity remains to be seen. The irony is rich. For decades, Western nations lectured Africa on development. Now they're being taught a new lesson on sovereignty, strategy, and self-respect. And the pressure is building. African diasporas in the US and Europe are raising their voices. They demand their home countries be treated fairly. They share stories of Ibrahim Traore and others who are standing up against decades of imbalance. The West can no longer afford to pretend these shifts are temporary. They are foundational. The question now isn't whether the world will adapt, it's how. Because one thing is clear, Africa is no longer asking permission to rise. And while the world calculates losses, Africa recalculates power. What's the road ahead? Africa stands at a threshold. The decisions made today, in boardrooms from Accra to Kinshasa, in factories rising in Kampala, and in rural farms across Guinea, will shape the continent's destiny for generations. But the road ahead is not paved in gold. It's layered with choices, risks, and a bold responsibility. The opportunities are immense. By keeping value at home, African nations are laying the foundation for long-term economic stability. Industrialization, once a distant hope, is now a tangible plan. With processing plants, smelters, packaging facilities, and tech hubs being built across the continent, a new ecosystem is forming, one where Africa is no longer just the source, but the manufacturer, the innovator, the market leader. This shift could lift millions from poverty, reduce dependency on foreign currencies, and finally allow African nations to speak with one voice on global trade platforms. But let us not ignore the challenges. Many countries still lack the infrastructure to process their own resources at scale. Electricity grids are fragile. Transportation networks are incomplete. Corruption and mismanagement linger in some corners. And let's be clear, powerful interests outside the continent will not give up easily. There will be resistance, there will be pressure, and there may be setbacks. Yet, what's emerging is a new kind of leadership, one that blends economic wisdom with fierce independence. Leaders like Ibrahim Traore, representing a generation unafraid to challenge the status quo, are charting a course that says, our wealth is not your inheritance. For this vision to thrive, unity is essential. Africa cannot rise in fragments. Nations must share knowledge, align trade policies, and support one another's industries. When Uganda refines its coffee, Ghana must open its ports. When Namibia processes lithium, South Africa must invest in battery plants. No more silos. No more crabs in a barrel. And for those watching from the diaspora, from Atlanta to London, from Paris to Brooklyn, this is your moment too. You are part of this rise. Your voice, your vote, your spending power, it matters. When you choose a product made in Africa, when you defend African policies in public forums, when you support leaders with vision and courage, you fuel the movement. This is Africa rising. And this is just the beginning, because this story doesn't end with restriction. It begins with liberation. This is not the Africa the world expected. For centuries, the story was written elsewhere, by traders, colonizers, CEOs, and politicians who saw the continent as a warehouse, not a world power. But today, that narrative is being torn up, line by a generation that refuses to be erased. From the timber mills of Gabon to the gold vaults of Ghana, from Uganda's coffee fields to the lithium labs of Namibia, Africa is rising, not quietly, not politely, but with purpose and power. It is a rise born of pain, but rooted in pride. A rise that does not beg for inclusion, but demands respect. It is Africa rising, and it is no longer just a chant from the hopeful. It is a movement built with policies, factories, and unshakable conviction. And at the heart of it all are leaders like Ibrahim Traore, who stand unbending in the face of old empires. Leaders who speak with clarity. Our soil is not your shortcut. Our people are not your labor. Our future is not yours to define. Yet this movement is bigger than any one man. It is fueled by elders who remember the silence and youth who now demand sound. It is carried by women running banks, farmers building empires, engineers designing the next leap forward. It is owned by those in Africa and those abroad who believe that justice is not charity, but policy. So now the world must decide. Will it resist this wave or ride it? Will it cling to outdated deals or step into a future of fair partnership? If this story stirred something in your chest, don't just scroll, share it, talk about it, subscribe, because history was stolen, but the future is ours to write. Africa Rising starts with voices like yours.